walk-off that shook the NBA? What if I told you that the most talked about moment of the NBA Finals wasn't the championship-winning shot, the trophy ceremony, or even the Finals MVP celebration? It was a walk. Just a few seconds. A young superstar turning his back and disappearing into a tunnel while the basketball world exploded behind him. And now, that single moment has divided the entire NBA. Some fans are calling him immature. Some former players are calling him disrespectful. Others believe they just witnessed the most human reaction possible from a 2-2-2-year-old who watched his dream collapse right in front of millions of people. But here's what nobody is talking about. Before Victor Wembanyama walked away from the court, before Draymond Green criticized him on national television, before social media turned him into the biggest villain of finals week, he had already suffered one of the most painful collapses any young superstar has ever experienced. Because this wasn't supposed to happen. This wasn't supposed to be New York's story. This was supposed to be Wemby's coronation. The moment the basketball world officially handed him the keys to the future. For months, analysts had been predicting it. The next face of the NBA, the next global icon, the next player capable of dominating both ends of the floor for the next decade. And when the finals began, everything seemed to be following that script. The Spurs were leading. The crowd was roaring. The spotlight belonged to Wembanyama. Every headline was already being written. The future had arrived, but then one man refused to follow the script. Jalen Brunson. While everyone focused on Wembanyama's rise, Brunson was quietly preparing to destroy the ending. Not once, not twice, but over and over again. Every time San Antonio built a lead, every time victory looked inevitable, every time the championship seemed within reach, Brunson found a way to rip it away. And with each blown lead, something inside the Spurs began to crack. At first, nobody noticed. A missed shot here, a turnover there, a bad fourth quarter, nothing unusual. But then it kept happening again and again and again. Soon, what looked like a championship run started looking like a nightmare nobody could wake up from. The pressure grew heavier. The criticism became louder. The expectations became impossible to ignore. And standing at the center of it all was a 2-2-2-year-old superstar carrying the hopes of an entire franchise. What happened next would change the entire conversation. Not just about the finals, not just about the Spurs, but about Victor Wembanyama himself. Because by the end of this series, people weren't asking whether he was talented. They were asking something far more dangerous. Does he have what it takes when everything falls apart? And trust me, the answer isn't nearly as simple as people think. In the next chapter, we're breaking down the shocking collapse that turned a championship celebration into a basketball disaster, and why Jalen Brunson became the one player Wemby simply couldn't solve. Before we continue, tell me where you're watching from today. And if you believe Wembanyama will come back stronger from this moment, type 1" the comments. If you think this finals exposed a serious weakness in his game, type 2. Don't forget to subscribe and join the conversation, because what happened next completely changed the trajectory of this rivalry. The collapse. Nobody could explain. The cruelest part about San Antonio losing this finals was that they never looked like the weaker team for long stretches. They were not getting destroyed. They were not getting outclassed. They were not begging to survive. They were leading. That is what makes this story so brutal. In almost every game, the Spurs had control. They had rhythm. They had the crowd believing. Wembanyama looked like the future of basketball standing right in front of us. The defense was stretching across the floor, the offense was moving fast, and New York kept looking like the team trying to escape. But then the fourth quarter's around, and everything changed. The same Spurs team that looked fearless for 3 quarters suddenly looked heavy. The ball stopped moving, the shots became harder, the decisions became slower. Every possession started feeling like a test they were not ready to pass. And while San Antonio tightened up, Jalen Brunson got calmer. That was the nightmare. Brunson did not beat them with size. He did not beat them with flash. He beat them with patience, footwork, timing, and a complete refusal to panic. When the Spurs needed one stop, Brunson found a gap. When Wembanyama stepped up, Brunson changed angles. When San Antonio sent help, Brunson made the right read. And every time the Spurs thought the game was finally safe, Brunson reminded them that safe does not exist in the final. Game 4 became the breaking point. San Antonio built a massive lead and looked ready to take command of the series. For a moment, it felt like the Spurs had finally solved New York. Wemby was active, the pace was perfect, and the Knicks looked frustrated. Then slowly, painfully, the lead disappeared. One missed jumper, one bad pass, one Brunson floater, one defensive mistake, then another, then another. By the time San Antonio realized the game was slipping away, the entire building could feel it. The Spurs were no longer protecting a lead. They were protecting their confidence. And New York smelled fear. That is what championship teams do. They do not just chase the score. They chase your nerves. They wait until your hands get tight and your mind starts racing. That night, The Knicks did not just steal a game. They planted a thought in San Antonio's head. We can take anything from you. And once a young team starts believing that, the finals become a mental war. The Brunson problem: every superstar eventually meets one opponent who refuses to respect the story. For Victor Wembanyama, that opponent was Jalen Brunson. The NBA wanted a giant versus the world storyline. A 7-foot alien changing the game. A defensive monster rewriting what was possible. A young face ready to take over the league, but Brunson walked into that script and tore out the final page. He was smaller, he was quieter, he was not supposed to be the player who ruined Wemby's moment, but that is exactly what made it so painful. Brunson did not need to overpower him. He made Wembanyama think. He made the entire Spurs defense hesitate. He lived in the space between confidence and panic. A shoulder fake, a hesitation dribble, a sudden stop in the lane, a floater before the contest arrived. Again and again, Brunson turned San Antonio's greatest strength into a problem they could not solve. Because Wemby's size is terrifying when the game is predictable. But Brunson made the game unpredictable. He attacked early, slowed down late, and forced every defender to choose wrong. If Wemby stayed back, Brunson floated it over him. If Wemby stepped up, Brunson slipped the pass or drew the defense out of position. That is what made the matchup feel personal. Not loud personal, not trash talk personal, basketball personal. The kind where one player quietly keeps finding the answer while the other player slowly realizes his usual gifts are not enough. And for Wembanyama, that had to hurt, because the criticism after the series was not about whether he is special. Everybody knows he is special. The criticism was about whether he could control the final 5 minutes of a finals game when the other side had a closer who simply refused to blink. Brunson became the mirror Wemby did not want to look into. He showed him what late game control looks like. He showed him what emotional stillness looks like. He showed him that talent can get you to the finals, but poise wins the last possession. And by the end of the series, New York was not just celebrating a championship. They were celebrating the fact that their leader had outlasted the NBA's future. That is why the walk-off became so explosive, because people did not see only frustration. They saw a young superstar walking away from the man who taught him the hardest lesson of his career. The moment the image cracked, before this finals, Wembanyama's image felt almost untouchable. He was the rare young superstar everybody seemed willing to protect. Humble, focused, different, a global talent with the personality of someone who understood the size of his gift. Fans loved the mystery around him. Analysts praised his maturity. The league saw him as the bridge to its next era. Then came one walk into the tunnel, and suddenly, the conversation changed. It was not fair in the simple sense, but sports rarely gives people fair timing. One emotional decision at the wrong moment can travel faster than 1,000 good ones. The image of Wemby leaving the floor while New York celebrated became impossible to ignore. No handshake, no eye contact, no quiet congratulations. Just the future of the NBA disappearing while the Knicks lifted themselves into history. For Knicks fans, it felt disrespectful. For Spurs fans, it felt understandable. For former players, it became a test of values. And for social media, it became gasoline. Within minutes, everybody had an opinion. Some said Wemby showed his true colors. Others said people were judging a young man too harshly in the worst moment of his career. That is where the story became bigger than basketball. Because when you are marketed as the next face of the league, people do not only watch how you win, they watch how you lose. They study your reactions, they freeze frame your body language, they turn pain into evidence, and that is exactly what happened here. The same silence that once made Wemby seem calm now looked cold. The same intensity that once made him seem locked in now looked bitter. The same competitive fire people praised all season suddenly became something they questioned. That is the danger of fame. The public builds an image of you, then punishes you the moment you remind them you are human. Wembanyama did not commit some unforgivable act, but he gave critics a clip, and in modern NBA culture, a clip can become a label. Soft, immature, classless, not ready. Those words started floating around before anyone even had time to breathe. And that is what made this moment so dangerous. The loss would hurt for one summer, but the image that could follow him much longer. Draymond, Shaq, Barkley, and the court of NBA opinion. The second Draymond Green spoke on it, the controversy changed levels. Because Draymond is not just another voice. He is a champion. He has won on the biggest stage. He has lost on the biggest stage. He knows exactly how ugly emotions can get when the confetti belongs to somebody else. So when he said he did not like Wemby walking off, people listened. His point was simple. You look your opponent in the face, you respect the team that beat you. You do not have to smile. You do not have to pretend it does not hurt. but you stand there long enough to acknowledge the battle. Coming from Draymond, that landed hard, but then came the other side. Some former players and analysts pushed back. They argue that the public expects athletes to perform perfect sportsmanship seconds after emotional devastation, even though most people would struggle to do the same in their own life. And honestly, that argument matters too, because Wembanyama is not a machine. He is a young player who just watched the biggest opportunity of his life collapse in real time. Still, the legends were not only judging the handshake, they were judging the pattern. Shaq and Charles Barkley had already spent the series questioning Wemby's mentality. Not his talent, not his ceiling, his edge. Could he dominate every night? Could he impose himself late? Could he become the kind of player who makes the game bend when the pressure rises? Those questions were already in the air before the final buzzer. So when Wemby walked off, the moment landed on top of an existing debate. To his supporters, it was pain. To his critics, it was proof. That is why the reaction became so loud. Nobody was really arguing about etiquette anymore. They were arguing about what kind of superstar Wembanyama is going to become. Is he the calm, thoughtful giant still learning how to process failure? Or is there something missing in the emotional armor he will need to survive the championship years ahead? That is the uncomfortable part. The NBA does not wait politely for young stars to grow up. It tests them in public. It embarrasses them in public, and then it asks them to answer in public. Wemby now has to answer not only with words, but with the way he plays the next time the lights get this bright. Because once legends start questioning your mentality, the only real reply is winning. The fans turned the finals into a trial. The fans did what fans always do after a moment like this. They chose sides. Fast. Knicks fans saw disrespect. After waiting more than 5 decades for a championship, they wanted every ounce of recognition. They wanted the losing team to stay, shake hands, and acknowledge that New York had earned it. To them, Wembanyama walking away looked like a superstar who wanted the spotlight when things were good, but disappeared when the moment belonged to somebody else. And that hit a nerve. Because New York fans do not forget. They will remember that walk every time the Spurs come to Madison Square Garden. They will replay it, they will chant about it, they will turn it into part of the rivalry. That is how NBA drama becomes tradition. But Spurs fans saw something different. They saw a two-year-old crushed by the worst loss of his career. They saw a player who had carried impossible expectations, fought through a brutal series, watched multiple leads disappear, and then had to stand in the same building where his dream had just been taken away. To them, asking him to instantly become graceful felt unrealistic, maybe even unfair. And that is why this debate became so powerful. Both sides had a point. Sportsmanship matters. Pain is real. Respect matters. Emotion is real. A handshake can mean something. So can needing 1 minute alone. The problem is that the NBA gives you no private place to break down. The cameras are always there. The microphones are always waiting. The internet is always hungry. 10 seconds become a character study. One walk becomes a verdict. And suddenly the world is no longer talking about Brunson's masterpiece, New York's historic title, or San Antonio's fourth quarter problem. They are talking about whether Wembanyama failed a test no one officially told him he was taking. That is the strange power of NBA drama. The game ends, but the story keeps playing. And for Wemby, this story might follow him all the way into next season. Because every great player eventually gets a scar. This may be his first one. The question is whether it becomes something that weakens him or something that hardens him. The real problem was bigger than a handshake. The handshake was loud, but it was not the real problem. The real problem was that San Antonio did not know how to finish. That is the part the Spurs have to face when the noise dies down. They were good enough to build leads, good enough to control tempo, good enough to scare New York almost every night. But they were not mature enough to close the door. That is the difference between a talented team and a championship team. Young teams often play with energy. Great teams play with control. The Spurs had energy. The Knicks had control. And in the finals, control wins. When San Antonio got ahead, they started protecting the lead instead of attacking the game. Their offense slowed down. Their spacing tightened. Their young players started looking at the clock instead of reading the floor. That is when New York struck. Brunson understood the moment better than anyone. He did not rush. He did not force. He kept pulling the game into his comfort zone until the Spurs were playing his kind of basketball. Slower, tighter, more physical, more mental. That is where San Antonio lost the series. Not in one missed handshake, not in one missed shot, but in the repeated inability to stay calm when the final stopped feeling fun and started feeling heavy. For Wembanyama, this is the lesson that matters most. He can not only be the future, he has to become the closer. He has to learn when to demand the ball, when to trust teammates, when to attack quickly, and when to slow the entire floor down with his presence. That takes time. Even legends had to learn it. Michael Jordan had to lose before he became inevitable. LeBron James had to feel finals heartbreak before he became a champion. Almost every great player has a chapter where the world says, maybe he is not ready. This is Wemby's chapter. Painful, public, and impossible to ignore, but also necessary. Because sometimes the finals do not crown you. Sometimes they expose the exact part of your game that must evolve. And if Wembanyama is who people believe he is, this loss will not be the end of his rise. It will be the beginning of the version of him the league should actually fear. New York did more than win a ring. The Knicks did not just win a championship. They created a new enemy. That is what makes this finals feel bigger than a normal 4-1 series. On paper, New York won clearly. But anyone who watched the games knows it was not simple. San Antonio led too often. Wembanyama was too dangerous. The Spurs were too close to let this just fade away as another finals loss. That is how rivalries are born. Not from easy wins, from wounds. The Knicks now have Brunson as the hero who stopped the future before it arrived. The Spurs have Wembanyama as the wounded superstar who will have to hear about this every time New York appears on the schedule. And the fans, they have the perfect fuel, a championship, a walk-off, a debate about respect, a young superstar with something to prove. That is exactly the kind of storyline the NBA lives on. For New York, Brunson's legacy changed forever. He is no longer just a tough guard, an overachiever, or a fan favorite. He is now the man who closed the finals, won the MVP, and stared down the league's most hyped young giant without blinking. That matters. Because stars are not only made by numbers, they are made by moments, and Brunson now owns the biggest moments of this series. Every fourth quarter, every comeback, every quiet possession where he turned pressure into points. He gave New York something it had been chasing for generations: belief. Meanwhile, Wemby now owns the pain. That sounds harsh, but it can become powerful. The NBA has a long memory, but great players learn how to rewrite it. The same clip people use to mock you can become the first scene in your comeback story. That is why next season matters so much. When the Spurs and Knicks meet again, it will not feel like a regular season game. It will feel like unfinished business. Every Brunson basket will bring back the finals. Every Wemby block will feel like a response. Every handshake after the game will be watched like a movie scene. And that is the wildest part. The finals ended, but the story did not. New York lifted the trophy. But San Antonio may have found its obsession. What Wemby must become next? The next step for Wembanyama is not about becoming more talented. He already has talent the league has never seen before. The next step is becoming harder to shake. Because the playoffs do not only test skill, they test emotional balance. They test pride. They test whether a player can take embarrassment, swallow it, study it, and return sharper. That is what Wemby has to do now. He has to watch the film, not just of the missed shots, but of the moments where Brunson controlled the rhythm. He has to study why the Spurs stopped trusting their movement late in games. He has to understand why leads disappeared so quickly once New York applied pressure. Most importantly, he has to learn that being the face of a franchise means your reaction becomes part of the team's identity. If he panics, they feel it. If he tightens up, they feel it. If he stays calm, they breathe. That is leadership, not speeches, not quotes, not social media posts. Presence. The great ones make teammates believe the game is still under control even when everything is falling apart. That is what Brunson did for New York. That is what Wemby must learn to do for San Antonio. And the scary thing for the rest of the league is that he probably will, because failure like this can destroy the wrong player. But it can also sharpen the right one. Imagine Wembanyama coming back with the same defensive gifts, but with better late-game patience. Imagine him stronger in the post, calmer against switches, more decisive when double teams arrive, more demanding when the game slows down. That version of Wemby is terrifying. This finals exposed him, but it also gave him the blueprint. He now knows exactly where the pain lived. Fourth quarters, physical pressure, emotional control, respect after defeat. Those are the areas that separate a generational talent from a generational winner. And that is why people should be careful laughing too loudly right now. Because the player who walked into that tunnel may not be the same player who walks back onto the final stage next time. Sometimes the worst night of your career becomes the night that builds the monster everyone fears later. The lesson behind the pain. When all the noise fades, this story is not really about a handshake. It is about growth. It is about a young superstar learning that greatness is not only measured by highlights, blocks, stats, or impossible shots. Greatness is also measured in the hardest second. The seconds after you lose. The seconds after the crowd turns against you. The seconds after the dream disappears and everybody wants to see what your face looks like. That is where Victor Wembanyama now finds himself. He lost the final. He lost control of the narrative. And for the first time in his NBA journey, he looked less like a perfect basketball experiment and more like a real young player dealing with real pain. That does not make him weak. It makes him human. But humanity does not remove responsibility. The lesson for Wemby is simple. Pain can explain your reaction, but it cannot always protect you from the consequences of it. Next time, he has to stay. Not because the cameras demand it, not because critics are waiting, but because respect is part of becoming the player he wants to be. You can hate losing and still honor the opponent. You can feel broken and still stand tall. You can walk away later, but first, you look the battle in the eye. Strategically, San Antonio also has a clear lesson. They are close, but not complete. They have the talent to lead finals games. Now they need the discipline to finish them. They need better late game execution, calmer decision-making, stronger leadership, and a version of Wembanyama who controls the final minutes instead of surviving them. For New York, the lesson is different. They proved toughness still matters. They proved experience still matter. They proved that a smaller player with elite control can break down even the most futuristic defender in basketball. And Jalen Brunson proved that legacy is built in the moments when everyone expects you to fold. But the most human lesson is bigger than basketball. Everyone has a moment where they fail publicly. Everyone has a moment where emotion wins before wisdom arrives. The goal is not to pretend pain does not exist. The goal is to learn from it without letting it turn into bitter. Wemby can come back from this. The Spurs can come back from this. And honestly, the NBA is better if they do, because this rivalry now has history, tension, pride, and unfinished business. So what do you think? Was Wembanyama wrong for walking away, or was the world too quick to judge a young superstar in pain? Comment your answer below. Type 1 if you believe Wemby will return stronger. Type 2 if you think Brunson exposed something serious. And if you love NBA stories, rivalries, drama, and real basketball breakdowns, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with another NBA fan. Because this story is not over. It may have just begun.